Hello and welcome to the Bpositive Bloodstream, a podcast providing insights, stories and experiences from and for all those affected by acute leukaemia and beyond. My name is Jonjo Rooney and I'm the founder of Bpositive and the host of the Bloodstream. So why a podcast? Well, the one thing I lacked when I was diagnosed with leukemia back in 2006 was hearing from people who knew what it was like to embark on a similar journey to myself. It's my hope that by sharing inspiring interviews from people who've either been affected firsthand in some way by blood cancer or who've had similar experiences that others can resonate with, then we can help support those in need. I want these podcasts to provide help, inspiration and belief to all people. Bpositive is both my blood group and my adopted mantra that I held throughout my treatment. I hope you enjoy our interviews, and if you wish to get in touch with us, then please do so by emailing us at info@bpositive.org.uk, or you can find us on Twitter at b_positive_org. In this next episode of the Bpositive Bloodstream, I wanted to tackle what I deem one of the most significant components, potentially one of the most significant components of someone's journey throughout treatment for blood cancer. September is Blood Cancer Awareness Month. Now you may well be listening to this. Podcast away from the month of September, but that's kind of by the by. But at the time of recording, it's in September. But yeah, as I said, I wanted to flag and highlight something that I deem is really quite important, and actually it's something that's begged a lot of questions. I certainly had questions. What is a stem cell transplant? What on earth is it? It wasn't until I didn't know what leukemia was, couldn't spell it, and I suppose you don't really tackle that side of things. Why should we know? We're not that well educated in school on all different types of illnesses. Something that I actually think the German population do fantastically. They build that into the curriculum, and I think we could take a lot of learnings from that. But as it is, a lot of people have a lot of questions around what a stem cell transplant is, what a bone marrow transplant is. There's a lot of myths to it. Is it painful? We've heard all these stories. I just thought it's probably worth spending a few minutes, and it's probably longer than a few minutes, know me, because I do like to ramble. But I do think it's worth just talking through my own experience with it and sharing, what a transplant entails and how I felt. Because it wasn't always a given that I would have one. It isn't a given for, I wouldn't want to say most people, but certainly a lot of people who have treatment for blood cancers, leukemias. It's not a guarantee that you have to have a bone marrow transplant. There's significant risk with having that. But each person's treatment path and prognosis and diagnosis will determine the treatment path they go on. And mine was just the case that it felt that the best chance of me being treated and potentially cured from this disease was through having a transplant. So, listen, how did I find out I was likely to have one? I, as much as anyone, was frightened by the word transplant. People often would say to me when I was in the build-up to it, "Oh, how are you feeling about the operation?" or "How did the operation go?" or "What did the operation entail?" It's not an operation; it's a procedure. I knew all the way through from the moment of diagnosis. I was told you have that many meetings, you have that many doctors, people tell you different things. Leukemia can absolutely be treated with chemotherapy alone. The reason I was always made aware of bone marrow transplants or stem cell transplants, they're pretty much the same thing. It's just the mechanism for obtaining the cells is done differently. But I was always told that a stem cell transplant was I was likely to have one of those purely because my high white blood cell count was so high that there was far more of a risk that my leukemia would return, and the best chance of that not returning in my case, and it's only my case because I wouldn't want to speak for all, was to undergo a transplant. Now look, chemotherapy can and does treat leukemia successfully. It absolutely does. I want to make sure that's absolutely clear. But each case is taken differently, and to have a stem cell transplant, that obviously comes significant risk, but you have to be in a place where you warrant it. It costs a lot of money for the NHS. There's a lot of risk involved, so they don't put you under it unless they feel it's the right thing for you. So my high white blood cell count was pretty much the main reason. I was told in my situation the best chance of stopping this leukemia returning, which I've said on other podcasts, getting rid of leukemia, getting yourself into remission actually isn't the most difficult part, I believe. It's stopping it returning. Now, when you've got such a high white blood cell count as I have, it was very much made clear to me that the likelihood is that may well return. So a transplant was my best option. But look, I was 23, 24, I was a grown up, treated as an adult, not an adolescent, so I have to make these decisions myself. But of course, it's a very, very fortunate position to be in if you can have a transplant and have a match. There's no guarantee of that. I've got brothers and sisters. They are naturally, genetically, the closest thing you'll have to yourself, obviously. So they would, so I was told, listen, we're going to have to match your brother and sister. So we're going to have to test your brother and sister, tissue type them, because there's so many different markers they look for when they want to match someone for a stem cell transplant. Effectively, with a stem cell transplant, the black and white of it is they empty your bloodstream and they want to impart someone else's as a brand new blood making system. That's what I was told. The science of it blew my mind. And so in order to get my head around it, I wanted to wait until I was told I definitely needed it, because I was always told, listen, you don't necessarily need it. Some doctors said, you won't necessarily have it. A lot of it depends on all the you need to get a match, but also if treatment's going that well. I remember one doctor saying to me, perhaps there might not be a need. If treatment's gone that well and you're in such a good remission, then you may not need it. I kind of hung on to that, in all honesty, because I was doing well with my treatment. I was knocking things down. I was responding well to treatment, and I was doing well. And at Worcester Royal Hospital in the West Midlands, where I was treated, I knew the staff. They were constantly keeping me informed, and my family, that listen, Jonjo's doing well with this. His leukemia, my leukemia had gone in a matter of weeks, but all the treatment is in a bid to further hammer it home so it stops it returning. So at the back of my mind, I thought, they haven't mentioned anything as the months went on about a transplant, because they just had to try and get me in the best place possible. So with that in mind, I do remember the moment. Actually, it was quite upsetting in a way, which I would hate to feel is in any way disrespectful, because I know some people it is their absolutely only hope, and it is without doubt the best chance for certain people to get through this, to get through their blood cancer. I was I was allowed home. I lived about 25 minutes away from the hospital in Worcester, and I'd come back in for some chemotherapy. So I was sat on a drip. I was there all day. And I remember the clinical nurse specialist chatting in the day case room, which is the room where there's a room full of, it looks like a bit like an old people's room, really. There's a load of people sat on comfy chairs just chatting. In fact, most of the people were older than me. I was the youngest by a mile. But I got on with everyone, and that wasn't a problem. But I was kind of sat there. Everyone had their own drip, their own thing. They'd bring in a lunch. But I was sat just going through the meal. And at this point, bearing in mind, I'd never clearly been told you're definitely having a transplant. But the lady came over to me, the clinical nurse specialist, quite excitedly, and said, oh, Jonjo, we've got some potentials for your transplant. Now, I didn't know what that meant. And look, I could tell from her voice it was good news. But my gut reaction, and I think it's only fair to be honest, was of there was a tinge of disappointment, because I felt, oh God, I really have to go through this. I felt I was doing so well with chemo. I didn't want to be put back under the microscope and under some kind of complicated procedure. I just wanted to get out of hospital and go home. That's all I wanted to do. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this may well have felt or are feeling the same. But I was actually quite wrong to feel like that, because it is a huge positive to be able to be in with a chance of having a transplant. As I mentioned earlier, your siblings will be tested if you have siblings. Again, that's quite lucky. I have the chance of having a great match from someone who's related to me. So my brother and sister were tested. Now, there's only a 25% chance that a sibling will make that match. They look for so many different markers that are probably far more scientific and complex than I can reveal here. But essentially, they look at tissue type. Blood type is just one of them, but that's not a necessity, I don't believe. But genetically, I'm obviously a very close match to my brother and sister. But unfortunately, they didn't match They didn't match me, they underwent the testing. They matched each other, which was a big kick up the arse for me. And we did have a bit of a joke about that. But no, my brother and sister, look, they matched each other, which, God forbid, should they ever be in need of a bone marrow transplant, then at least they know the other one is a match. But no, the youngest of the family and the little annoying kid, me, I was there left without that chance. But listen, I still always felt blessed and pretty fortunate that I even had that opportunity. Now listen, there were talk of going to my parents to match them. In some cases they do that because it's a close genetic match, if there wasn't something available on the bone marrow register and the Anthony Nolan register. So I got told a few potentials had been found. Now this did scare me, but listen, everything scared me in hospital. Meeting a new person, meeting a therapist, anything that I was signing up for, I was scared of the unknown, and I think a lot of people may well resonate with that. But this idea of a transplant, I didn't know what it was. I had absolutely no idea. And then I got told that we found a match of these potentials. Now they would not tell you they've got potentials if they didn't feel like these people are in a good place to donate. So what I was told is to become a potential, they must have contacted them. The hospital would go through the Anthony Nolan Trust, who are an amazing charity, and the bone marrow transplant register. They would contact these people and say, listen, you have matched. They've donated blood cancer. They donated their bone marrow, or they've donated their blood even, but they've tissue typed and they've matched on so many fronts. And you've signed up to be eligible to donate to someone. And we're telling you that you've actually matched someone. It could be in this country, it could be anywhere. And I got told that I had a very good match, which again, it scared me, but I started to come around to thinking, well, this is good news really. But listen, it's hard to get excited about something that's really going to knock you down, make you unwell, is a high risk. All these things that I learned, which I'll come on to shortly in my meeting with the people at Birmingham. But at this point, I just didn't want to transplant. I just wanted to get out of the hospital. But listen, if that's what I was going to have, obviously I felt lucky to have a match. But it's hard to feel elated when you know you have to go through something quite scary. And I was absolutely scary. I was absolutely scared. I was emotionally fragile. You know, I don't want to admit in that. I've always been someone who wears my heart on my sleeve. But to know I had to go through this, it did. It scared the life out of me. So I started asking questions. What is a transplant? What does it entail? I'd held off asking the staff this prior to this point because I was probably scared of the answer, you know. But actually, when I was told, listen, this is a 15-minute transfusion, I thought, is that it? I've had about 1 million transfusions, platelets, fresh frozen plasma, obviously hemoglobin, red blood, everything. I'd had everything they'd thrown at me, saline solution. I was hooked up all the time having transfusions of some kind. So I was like, oh wow. And they said, yeah, listen, at Worcester we don't do it here, so you're going to go to Birmingham and they're going to talk you through it. But yeah, essentially I think you'll have a 15-20 minute meeting over at Birmingham, but it's a blood transfusion. It will take no longer than an hour, half an hour in some cases, but yeah, it's a blood transfusion, no different to what you've had. So I was neutropenic at the time, which meant I had very low immunity. I had very damaged immunity, I had cancer, but you know, I had particularly low immunity, which meant I couldn't be exposed to people at this stage through being treated. In case they had coughs and colds and stuff, my immune system was so susceptible to infection that it could really be damaging. So I had to go to Birmingham. It might have been February time. It was wet, it was cold. So me and my mum jumped in the car and went to Birmingham to have this chat with my consultant over there that I was due to have. And the plan was I would go and, to my mind, have a 15-minute chat about a blood transfusion and back to Worcester. It was very different to that. It was a very, very, very tough day for me, and I suppose my family, but for me mainly. Listen, my mum is the world's biggest worrier, and I always say if I lost a pair of socks, which I have done loads of times, she would lose sleep. It doesn't take a lot for my mum to worry. But she was trying to park the car in Birmingham city centre, in Selly near the hospital. Thousands of cars. My mum likes the hometown of Bromsgrove. If she goes further from there, it makes her slightly apprehensive and nervous. So trying to park the car, knowing we were running late for this meeting, was quite was quite an upheaval, and it made it quite a sort of frustrating time. So I said, Mum, listen, I'll jump out and head and go and sit in the waiting room, because we were getting further away from the hospital. So I was sat there waiting, surrounded by all these patients who looked like cancer patients, which I looked like, because I was one. I absolutely was the same, but having that constant reminder, sat in a room waiting to hear about something you had no idea about. My blessing was that I felt, look, it's going to be a quick meeting. Mum was still struggling to park the car, and she said she'd come and join me. I was called into the room, and I had no real understanding of what I was about to hear. It was a terrifying experience. And listen, it wouldn't have been if I'd have been prepped better. And this isn't a complaint. I've got no reason in the world, and no grounds and no legs to stand on in terms of complaining about any kind of treatment I've had. But I will speak up when I think things could and should be improved. And I should have been better prepared for what I was about to hear. I think you should tailor your support to the individual where you can. And I think I should have been briefed a bit more as to what I was about to hear. I was told of every single thing that could possibly go wrong with this. But let me take it back a second. I wasn't with my consultant. She was unavailable. She is incredible. All the staff are incredible. Worcester, Birmingham, couldn't speak more highly. But I was put in a room with it was a registrar, who's since got nicknamed Dr. Doom, because everything he said sounded like bad news. And my consultant wasn't there, and I was getting talked to a complete stranger. I was given my life in numbers. I was being told about mortality rates. I was told there was a 50% chance of my transplant actually being successful and potentially curing me of this. That's hit and miss, 50% chance. That's the roll of a dice, you know. That's casino stuff. I want more than 50% chance. I was told there was 20 to 25% chance of mortality rate. That frightened the life out of me. I was inundated with information for about 90 minutes. My mum, I think, still couldn't park the car. I think she may have, I can't even remember actually if she came into the meeting at any point. I think about an hour and 15 minutes I was in there, and I don't think my mum could make it in. I think due to complications trying to park the car and getting flustered. For whatever reason, I did that alone, and I was in floods of tears. I was beside myself. I was bewildered. I started, what's the best way of describing it? I started zoning out. I couldn't hear any more bad news. I just couldn't hear any more. There was no positivity. And it was all, I was saying, well, hang on, do I have to have this? I'm doing really well. No, you don't have to have this, Jonjo. You know, history and science tells us that you are likely to relapse. So transplant is potentially curative for you. Without that, we expect your disease to return. I felt like I had a gun to my head. It honestly felt worse than being diagnosed. And I don't say that flippantly. Diagnosis, as I shared previously on a previous podcast and a Bpositive Bloodstream podcast, I shared my feelings about how it was to be diagnosed. This honestly felt worse because I felt I was progressing so well, and to be told I had to have this and to have to make the decision myself, it was either go back to chemo and hope I'm all right because I'm doing well for now. Listen, I knew the best thing for me was a transplant. I just didn't want to face up to the reality of having it. But then my consultant, Dr. Prem Mahendra, incredible woman, can't speak more highly of her. She came into the room. I think she might have been, she was taken away at another meeting, but she wanted to be in the room, but she came in. I think she might have been prompted that I was in a bad way. And she's got incredible bedside manner for someone of her high intellect and importance and the amount she has to deal with. She had this bedside manner that just made her human to me. She was a real reassuring voice, and I thought, I'm in good hands with this lady. It isn't really that I didn't feel I was with the other guy. It was that he was more factual and spoke in black and white about numbers and percentages. I wanted to talk to a person. I didn't want to be referred to in the third person. I just wanted to feel like someone was talking me through this, and they went through everything. I was just in floods of tears. I think too much had been said at this point, that when Prem came in, I did feel better, but they were shocked. The look on their face, they were like, why is he crying? Well, because I hadn't been prepared for this. And I think there's a flaw in the system there. I think you've got to not sugarcoat what people are going to hear. Listen, I'm more fragile than the next person who came in to hear that news, I'm sure. But they should, I think they should take that into consideration. And the patron for Bpositive, Dr. Adele Fielding, who again you'll remember because we touched on this subject in a previous podcast, up in Liverpool, she said she does tailor it. She gets a sense for what that patient can handle at that time and said, listen, let's have a breather, let's bring it back tomorrow, let's take it through stages. I think I needed that day. But listen, the black and white of it was I needed a transplant. I was very, very, very scared. And I just think there should have been a better understanding and a preparation for what I was about to hear. Now, I was told, listen, after I'd departed Worcester Royal from my chemotherapy, I was about to have a couple of months of preparing for a transplant. So what does that entail? Well, I was told, eat as much as you can. You need to put on a load of weight because you're going to lose it with the transplant. You're absolutely going to lose it. So I did that. I was eating as much. It was great, actually. I mean, I was having takeaways left, right and centre. Big curry fan. I was down the local curry house very often. And you know, I was trying to get myself in the best place where I knew I was going to lose a lot of weight. But to be honest, throughout that period, and I do jest about enjoying all the takeaways, I obviously knew I had this big dark cloud over my head that was a transplant. I couldn't really relax. But I was away from the hospital at least, and I was having daily visits from the district nurses to patch up my Hickman line, to check my bloods and things like that. But I could do that from home, which again is a blessing. Not everyone's in a position to do that, but that certainly helped me psychologically. I remember I didn't receive correspondence from meetings and things because they sent it directly to my family. I said to my family, any letters just keep. I don't need to read that, it's only following up what I had. But I remember being in the car with my sister, I think we're on the way to the supermarket, and I saw she had that follow-up from the meeting in Birmingham, and I asked her to read it, and she touched on, and it was like hearing it for the first time. There were so many bits I'd missed. Nothing of great, well, it's all greatly significant, but nothing that was alarming, just more that I was hearing again. They were referring to me as this 23-year-old gentleman. It felt so divorced from empathy and sympathy. I felt so isolated from this, that I'd come from Worcester where I was part of their family, I felt. The nurses, incredible people. And I was soon to become that at Birmingham. But at this stage, I had all these strangers talking to me about, as referring to me as a 23-year-old gentleman, delivering all those life in numbers again. Percentage chance of mortality rate, the word mortality. I mean, I know what mortality means, but I'm questioning my sister saying, hang on, that means death. Yeah. And they're giving you this percentage. It's a bet, you know? It knocked me for 6. I was in tears again. And this is in the period I was supposed to be preparing myself for a transplant. The truth be said, there isn't a lot to do when you're preparing for a transplant, for large parts. However, I was told that I needed to undergo some tests. Due to the severity of my prognosis and the likelihood of a risk of relapse, I was very much signed up for the full ticket. I was there to have radiotherapy, total body irradiation, they called it, TBI, which meant, well, for any of you who don't know, typically with illnesses such as breast cancer, they will target radiotherapy to the breast area. Whereas obviously I had a blood cancer, so it meant your whole body, total body, has to be hit. So, but I had to be prepared for that. I was, again, my case deemed that I needed specific boost to the cranium and also to the groin area, something to do with the density of the bone, I believe. So I had to be fitted for a mask. So before I started my radiotherapy, when I was due to go in for my transplant, I had this mask fitted. It put this mesh over, they vacuum formed this plastic thing, which I was quite jovial about, saying, oh, I've got a mask on my face and all that, let's keep that, I definitely want to keep that. However, I soon felt sick on the sight of it when I got admitted. But I underwent some radiotherapy for a week. I started on a Friday, went home for the weekend, went back in for some more radiotherapy on the Monday, and then I was admitted into, it was my own room, an isolated room on I think it was up on the 5th floor, Ward East 3A in Birmingham, old Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The new one's absolutely state of the art and fantastic. Again, short straw, I had the old decrepit one, but listen, it got me here. But it was a very old building. It was a very different feeling to being in Worcester. It was quite scary. It was old brick. It was very, very, very daunting actually. But I had to go and I made sure I went down myself. At Worcester, you can't leave the room without being wheelchaired somewhere. They really take care of you. Birmingham, I had to go in the lift, down 5 flights of stairs to the radiotherapy room. I decided, because the lifts were a bit dodgy, some of them were working, some of them weren't, so I decided I'm going to do all the walking myself. So I went down the flights of stairs to try to keep my fitness as high as I could, knowing I was about to embark on this. And I was in an isolated room. I'd had the radiotherapy. I had this substance that was some antibodies that I think was something they use in rats, I was told. It gave me a real feverish feeling. And at this point, I started to feel tremendously fatigued. Now, radiotherapy, when I was having radiotherapy, I was going down to the rooms. I would have 12 minutes each side. It's like being microwaved. I was sat there, they turned me around, I was strapped to what looked like the electric chair. They spun me round and I got 12 minutes one side, 12 minutes the other. I'd already had the boost to the head and the groin. The very sight of that mask nearly made me vomit, so I made sure I got rid of that from my room. So much for the souvenir, that was gone. I actually do remember, and I always think of this whenever I hear his songs, I'm actually a fan of, you get to listen to some music when you're in there, because you're just in there for the best part of 45 minutes to an hour whilst they set up. The thing with radiotherapy, it takes so long to set up, it's a matter of seconds of them doing it. David Gray's White Ladder is always an album I will relate to my radiotherapy, because I had very few CDs, but I like a bit of folk, so I put on David Gray. So every time I hear White Ladder, or Babylon even, I go straight back to having my total body irradiation. Now, it might be worth flagging here, from my side of things, obviously I received some stem cells. From a donor side, how do you provide stem cells? Well, essentially, after having given blood, and I was asking these questions, what's happening to my donor? And you're kept in the loop the whole way. Your donor will have been plugged in one side of his arm, put into a cell separation machine with this wire, or lead, or I can't think of the word, and then put back in and reconnected to the other arm. So it's an incredibly fascinating machine. It would take blood from one arm. This machine separates the stem cells. Now the stem cells are, and I don't want to teach anyone to suck eggs, but for those who don't know, I certainly didn't know, they're basically the seed for what a flower would be. They're the starting point. So this machine knows to take out of your blood, it will separate those cells from your bone marrow, because I was given growth injections up to this point, which would make me produce more and makes these stem cells rise to the surface, so they're easier to capture. So they capture them that way. It goes back into his arm. They did a few rounds of that. They put them in a bag and froze it and wired it straight over to me. And it literally got frozen, so there's a certain shelf life. It has to be delivered to the patient. So there I am, sat in my isolated ward. Everyone has to have chemotherapy for your transplant. So as I said, it isn't an operation, it's a 4-week procedure. The first week was radiotherapy, total radiation, and various bits of chemo, antibodies and things. Then I started getting more chemo, which was 5 times the strength of anything I'd encountered before. This is now to absolutely empty your body of your blood. They want you on 0 so that they can put the new cells in and start from scratch. So the countdown is like from -14 down to 0. That's 14 days down to 0. And then from 0, they count up each day. And roughly at day 14, you should be looking at leaving. Some people go on 6 weeks longer, of course. But the plan is to try and get it wrapped up around the 4-week mark, which actually I did, just shy of that, very lucky. So my chemotherapy was very strong. I've started to get ill now. Now the radiotherapy has a delayed reaction. Although you don't feel a thing when you have radiotherapy, it can make you very sick. Now I had total body, and it was obviously with that on top of the severe strength of the chemotherapy that was 5 times as much as everything that had got me to a remission in the first place, it hits you for 6. I was very, very, very sick. I felt nauseous all the time. I developed severe mucositis, which is I'm not sure if disease is the right word, but it's certainly an infection from your mouth to exit, they described it. So everything was seemingly burnt from the radiotherapy. That isn't something that most people encounter, very few, but I was one of them who did. It meant I couldn't swallow for the best part of a week, and I had to be put on. I think for about a week I was very much. When you get around day 0, your counts are on 0. I can't remember if it was before or after I received my cells, but I certainly was at my worst. Actually, it was after I was at my worst. So just prior to that, I was feeling very fatigued, and I was lay up in bed. Now, I got told the transplant that some complications. I think there was an attempted terrorist attack on Birmingham Airport, so they had to divert. They went to Manchester, had to get couriered down then from a train. There was train cancellation, so it got put back. And listen, it's not like open heart surgery where you're literally on the operating table. I'm sat there on my bed just waiting for this transfusion. And eventually it came, but it came hours later. But it has to be delivered in a certain point in time, because obviously I'm on low zero. I'm on 0. There's nothing lower than 0. Well, there's minus, but at this point my blood was empty. So I needed these cells. These cells have to be delivered within a certain time frame. But they arrived, and I was all very, oh God, really heads up. What's going to happen? What's the cells going to be? I knew some information. I was told a little bit of information about it. I knew it was a male, similar to me. I knew he had Bpositive, the blood group, which was great. It meant I would keep mine because you inherit your donor's blood group. The tissue type was described as a perfect match, so the closest thing you could have without being an identical sibling, which is tremendously lucky. But I'll come on to why that's lucky when I sort of wrap this up. But I was in a great place to receive these cells. It was a similar age. Again, that doesn't really matter. But it was. So I just felt like I had a great chance. The professor had come and said, I haven't mentioned, the donor was found in Germany. And Professor Craddock at the hospital had said that he absolutely values German stem cells. I was making jokes that if I'm rebuilt as a German and I'll have German blood, it probably makes my penalty taking a lot better. That hasn't happened, but I felt I was in good hands. Listen, the Germans build everything brilliantly, so cars, anything. So I was very pleased and very, very, very fortunate to have this. The transplant itself took about 35 minutes. I was just playing Sudoku on the phone. No smartphones then. It was a Nokia 3310 playing Snake and Sudoku, I believe. Bit of an anticlimax, I remember. The transplant it looked like tomato soup. They got poured in for 35 minutes, and it was literally like anything else. Of course, I wasn't ever told of all the things that I had to have with the radiotherapy, the feelings you would have, the high intensive chemo, the antibodies. But it was, in essence, the transplant is a very short transfusion. But at day 0, that's when you need to be watched because you're at your lowest. And they want to make sure you graft. And then by grafting, you take to your new donor. What we don't want is a rejection. I don't want there'll be some residual parts of my bloodstream that would recognise this new foreign entity coming into the bloodstream. If that becomes a conflict, then my body may well reject it, which happens in some rare cases. Now, obviously, all the research has gone into find you a good match where that shouldn't happen. But I'm naturally worried that may happen. So that's what they monitor in those early days. I was as lowest as I'd been throughout any part of my treatment. I was tremendously ill. Mucositis meant I couldn't swallow for a week. I couldn't pass anything. My mum came to visit me on a Saturday, and I didn't surface. I was on morphine, and there was a national shortage due to the war in Afghanistan. So I was on what I was allowed to be given, which was the maximum for a patient in my condition, and I was counting down the moments until I could have it refreshed. I was high as a kite, really. No idea why anyone would really want to be doing morphine or anything similar, but I wasn't surfacing, I was hallucinating. I was having some very sort of sweaty, strange thoughts and dreams. But my mum told me I wasn't present in the room. I was very much lay up in bed. And one thing that I do think back to and will always remember, and it's sort of a tinge with sadness really. One of the auxiliary nurses or one of the cleaners came into, as they do each day, to clean your room, and I'd been chatting to this lady, lovely lady from Birmingham, each day, and I was always trying to be my jovial self and happy. At this point I was so down. She worked weekends, that was it. Jackie, the cleaner, worked in the week, fantastic, salt of the earth woman. But on weekends this other nurse would come in, so she hadn't seen me for a week, and I'd really hit a low point at this point. And I was, it seemed sort of comatose. I was just lay out on morphine high, so I couldn't really interact. But I could sense her, she was weeping, she was crying. I could hear her sniffling to herself, and I could see out the corner of my eye, she was upset. And I think, listen, it could be for any reason, but my gut told me I wasn't myself, and how she knew me. And I really think back to that, because she, I'd always have a chat with her, and I really got the sense that she was probably taken aback by how much of a change there was in me. But this is temporary, and I was always told, you're going to come out of this and you're going to start feeling better. And almost to the day the doctor had estimated that, it came through, and I did feel like that. And I started to pick up. I couldn't speak. I couldn't pass things through my mouth. I started getting into Wotsits, an unhealthy addiction to Wotsits, because it was very soft and I could have it, and I was having protein shakes to start getting some sort of strength back. And gradually I did. I remember making a call to my mum a day after she'd visited me, and I said, and she thought it was my brother. She was like, it can't be you. I saw you yesterday and you weren't speaking, no. And literally it was like a switch, and I came on and I started building up from there, and the count started rising, your blood count started rising, your white blood cell count is it the most important. That started to pick up. I started getting less neutropenic. I was getting there, and that's what happens, and it is a gradual build. And from week 3 into week 4, I was getting back up, and I was totally on my way back to not full recovery, but certainly getting back to where the doctors wanted me to be. It was tough, but I mean, it was even tougher because there was no smartphones, there was no signal where I was. Everything's improved greatly, and those little things will carry you through the day. But ultimately, I just wanted to get out. And I think for another podcast, I'm going to save talking about how it felt to be told you're going from home, because I think it relates to certain sort of music things that I hold onto quite dearly. I think I won't go into that now, but I'll certainly save that for another one. But I was told, listen, I'll be going home. So now one thing I was told is that you're likely to encounter some GVHD, which is graft versus host disease. So as my recovery was beginning, graft versus host, by the way, is your like the graft is the foreign donor's blood, and the host is my body, and it's how does that conflict. I mentioned earlier about rejection, so a big thing they look out for is the anti-rejection. Is rejection, so they give you anti-rejection drugs. So I was put on those, cyclosporine, looked like horse tranquilizers. I could barely swallow them, bigger than my face. But they were a bit of a struggle to get down, but they were so important, and it took me a while to come off them. So I was getting rashes on my body. It was localized to my foot. Now, that can be quite a serious disease, graft versus host. If it overtakes you and becomes too much, it can be really quite damaging. But I was told if you get it mildly, it's not the worst thing. In fact, they quite encourage it, for want of a better term, because it means your body is up for a fight. And should any badness try and return, your body can fight it off. But it stopped me walking. It was localized to my foot, it had spread. It was itchy, so itchy. That I really was limping. It was like having a broken foot. But with the anti-rejection drugs, that subsided, and I gradually started picking myself back up. I was really pleased to get out of that hospital in under 4 weeks. Of course, there's a huge way to go then, a good year of recovery. But that was the stem cell transplant, and that's what it entailed. So I hope that's of some use. I think to conclude, why did I discuss this? Why did I bring this up? As I mentioned at the start, I think it's a key component to someone's journey through treatment for blood cancer. and anyone who needs a bone marrow transplant probably needs to know what it's about. We've written things, people can chat, there's a lot of things on the internet. I'd probably have valued hearing something like I've just done, someone's story. What actually is it like? But the main reason I wanted to do it is also why was I in a significantly better place to have a transplant? Why was I in a better place to receive a match than someone else? And it's an unfair cultural and postcode lottery, for want of a better term. And that's only a term I've made up off the top of my head. But people are different. I am white Caucasian, so I infinitely had a better chance because there's more people of my genetic makeup on the bone marrow register. That is unacceptable, that's unfair. Of course, I'm blessed and hugely appreciative that I had that chance. Of course I am. But I do think there's a lot of work to be done to make sure everyone should have that chance. And it just isn't the case at the moment. So if I'm laying in a room next to someone who is from a different ethnic group, makeup, background, they might have a less of a chance. That's unfair. It's absolutely unfair, and it's something we radically need to change. I feel deeply passionate about that. I've campaigned for that. I've worked with Anthony Nolan on doing that. They do some absolutely fantastic work, and I'd urge you to get involved in the Register and Be a Lifesaver campaign, of which I was a part of in its infancy. But again, we can go into more discussions about that on another podcast. But there's a lot of myths. Donating blood, it isn't painful. It used to be. They used to drill into your bone to get it. Now it's stem cell. As I said, they put a wire. They as you've had any blood, taking any blood, they inject you, take your blood. It goes into a machine. They spit out the cells. It goes into another machine, and and then you've donated. Please sign up. If you give blood and you're able to do so and you're willing to do so, please, you should be asked, do you want to join the bone marrow register? It is a very simple thing to do. But there'll be far more people like I am, and they're waiting for a match now. It's an absolutely painless thing to do. And at Blood Cancer Awareness Month, which is this month, September, I really feel there's no better time to hammer home and reinforce that message by doing that. Like my donor did that. The guy I'm indebted to for the rest of my life for saving my life, he donated blood, and then they said, "Can you donate bone marrow if someone's in need?" Yeah, he signed up to do that, and it was very easy and very pain-free for him. He saved my life, and you can absolutely be the same. You can be a lifesaver. And honestly, I can't think of any gift. I can't think of any gift greater than that. Please go out, find your local blood donation, and get involved. But listen, this isn't just a rallying call. This is as much for people who are about to face a transplant. I want them to know what it entails, and to know there's so many positive outcomes for this. But it relies on people saving their lives, and those people need to donate blood and bone marrow. So I hope you're going to do so. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.